Hello YouTube. Today we'll speak about the Bermuda Triangle. Back in July of 2009, former Soviet Rear Admiral and nuclear submarine commander Yuri Beketov was quoted describing events that occurred in the so-called Bermuda Triangle. He mentioned that we repeatedly observed that the instrument detected the movements of material objects at unimaginable speeds, around 230 knots or 400 kilometers per hour. Well, it's about 250 miles. It's hard to reach that speed on the surface. Only in the air it is readily possible. The beings that created those material objects significantly exceed us in development. Again, this is according to Yuri Beketov. Russian naval intelligence expert and captain of first rank Igor Barclay noted that the unidentified objects were most often spotted in deep water where military forces are concentrated, of the Bahamas, Bermuda, Puerto Rico, and the east coast of the United States. That's where the Soviet submarines were, going on their missions, among other places. Indeed, in the post-war World War period, mysterious objects and phenomena were often noticed, and most of the time they were mistaken for space aliens, extraterrestrial beings. Especially many such objects were observed above the surface of the ocean and even in its depths. Most often the crews of the submarines had to deal with the mysterious visitors. In the area of Bermuda Triangle, Soviet submariners were constantly on combat duty, that is, in the immediate vicinity of the United States, for a lightning strike of retaliation on the enemy territory in the event of war. The former commander of nuclear submarine Rear Admiral Yuri Beketov stated the following: "We carried out combat service in the underwater position. I was urgently invited to the central post. A signal of certain frequency was detected, which moved very quickly. That is, there was no noise of propellers, no signs that it was a surface target, just a quick move of the signal. Even if it is a torpedo, it still would make noise." And here the speed of movement was about 125 to 135 knots. It is known that no country has been able to create such underwater vehicles that could move in the water environment at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour. Similar velocities are not found in marine life. The sailors had no doubt that this was an encounter with aliens. Then the signal bypassed us and disappeared. There was no sense that the target was moving away. The signal was decreasing. It just dropped sharply, and that was it. We recorded everything we heard, classified it as an unidentified object, recalls Yuri Beketov. These ships are all alien. They protect themselves very well, while reckless pilots, who are famous for their bravado, relying on their speed, tried several times to approach, he means the objects, such objects, to approach such objects, to get in contact with them, but it all ended very badly. They turned on their wave weapons, and either the pilots lost conscience, then came to their senses, or even came to disasters, meaning that pilots lost their lives, and I mentioned that in my other videos too. Such cases were recorded in the 1970s. We have many such facts, admitted a veteran naval intelligence officer of the USSR, Igor Barclay, in the program on the Russian TV. According to him, the Navy has collected solid material that indicates the possible involvement of unidentified objects of extraterrestrial civilization in the drama in the Bermuda Triangle. But this topic has not been developed. This was well before any recent American pronunciations or airing of videos from Pentagon and so forth. In the Soviet Union, this was well known well before. And before I continue, I do want to let my audience know that I have collected facts about underwater submersible objects for decades, particularly the Russian, Imperial, Soviet, and post-Soviet cases. As a result of my work and contribution from my dear colleague Philip Mantle in the United Kingdom, we wrote and published a book titled Russia's USO Secrets. This book contains numerous episodes of sighting, encounters, and observations of UFOs and USOs by Russian Navy and Merchant Marines, scientists, and military pilots, and more in the oceans, seas, lakes, rivers of our planet. The book is now available in English, French, Italian, Portuguese, Russian, and Spanish languages. German is next. But I would like to see it translated to Arabic, Chinese, Hebrew, Hindu, Japanese, Korean, and so on. Well, that's because sailors of different countries have observed similar UFOs and USOs, but many are reluctant to speak out, so as not to be ridiculed, jeered, or ordered to shut up. But you see, we want to break the hold on information by this international bureaucracy and by their lackeys, because this planet belongs to all of us, and we must know what forces are lurking or operating in the oceans and other bodies of water around us. So I believe Russian Navy chiefs and counterintelligence officers who share their information. Some of them are in advanced age and they die out. I mentioned several Soviet officers in my videos before who revealed fascinating cases, but that was not long before they passed away due to their age. They had served in the Navy during the Soviet times. Modern and growing Russian Navy has its own experiences, and we will bring them to you, new cases, as the information and if the information becomes available. By the way, as for those who are active in the waters of the United States, it is not only the Russians now. The Chinese military is already in the Caribbean, in Cuba, apparently to collect signals, intelligence from the United States. Throughout the Caribbean, China's influence is growing fast. China's ultimate objective may well be to establish a strategic beachhead in the Caribbean as a bargaining tool to be used to alter U.S. actions or policies, perhaps attempting to force the United States to reduce or withdraw its considerable military force in the Pacific region in exchange for a reduction in China's involvement in the Caribbean. But I am not interested in high-stakes international politics, and I highly doubt the animosity between the United States, China, and Russia in the most important area of current world affairs, the challenge from what I believe are extraterrestrial forces and their presence in the oceans and so forth of our planet. Of course, Chinese submarines would be checking the Bermuda Triangle, I have no doubts, and as the American submarines would be visiting the waters of the Pacific Bermuda Triangle in the Far East. Please see my video about that mysterious and deadly place. But, so what is the Bermuda Triangle? Well, one of the most well-known mysteries found in our oceans is the Bermuda Triangle, sometimes called the Devil's Triangle or Hurricane Alley. This is a region found in the western parts of the North Atlantic Ocean. The region is loosely defined, and it is known as the place where several ships and planes disappeared under inexplicable circumstances. Now, I am going to use here strictly Russian information about this strange territory in the Atlantic. You can find out Western information elsewhere. The Russian information includes materials they obtained and research, their scientific opinion, and appropriate recollections of events. Now, according to statistics, only in the 20th century in the Bermuda Triangle, about 150 ships and planes disappeared without a trace, and more than 1,000 sailors and aviators went missing. The Bermuda Triangle is a crossroads of a huge number of air, passenger, and transport roads. Well, as at any intersection, most often there are accidents. Radio communications disappear. This happened to the Soviet scientific research vessel Akademik Kurchatov in the waters of the Bermuda Triangle. And the Kurchatov team sent information to the nearest ship that the connection was lost and they were restoring it. But this information did not reach the Institute of Oceanology in Kaliningrad, and people there were frightened. How so? In the Bermuda Triangle, Kurchatov has disappeared. Well, on the Soviet research vessel, communication was being restored, and the ship did not sink into the abyss. But other ships were less fortunate. Why did good quality vessels, led by or manned by experienced crews, immediately go underwater in calm weather? Seasoned sailors recalled the legends that sometimes in the sea, in the Bermuda Triangle, the sea parted and terrible monsters instantly engulfed the ships. Scientists put forth their own versions and explanations. Let's start with this case. In December of 1945, an event occurred that marked the beginning of the study of the legendary place in the Atlantic Ocean, bounded by Bermuda, Miami, and Puerto Rico. It is known to the public as the Bermuda Triangle. It was here, in 1945, that 5 American torpedo bombers, Flight 19, disappeared without a trace. Ships had disappeared here before, but it was not until 1945 that the Sargasso Sea began to receive special attention. Let's listen to the opinion of a renowned Russian scientist, Professor Doctor of Physics and Mathematical Sciences, Professor of Marine Biology, Vladimir Zhmur. He was interviewed for Russian newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda about the triangle. Vladimir Vladimirovich, there are many legends around the Bermuda Triangle. The incident of December 5, 1945, did it take place or not? He was asked. Yes, there was a training flight 19 and there were 14 missing pilots. Well, more precisely 27 if you count together with the rescue seaplane, which also went down, disappeared. There is a version that they were abducted by a UFO because radio amateurs allegedly intercepted strange phrases. We're going down into the white waters and don't follow me, they look like they came from outer space. He was asked. A thorough investigation was conducted, said the professor, and there is no such information in the official report. A conspiracy theory? Well, officially the human factor is the explanation. The 4 planes were flown by inexperienced cadets. Only the flight commander had experience, but he had only recently received the assignment and did not know the geography of the area. And now his navigation equipment is failing. He tries to navigate by the sun and the islands, makes a mistake, and directs the planes away from the base. Moreover, the young pilots tried to object. Their gyro compasses worked, but the commander resisted. As a result, the aircraft just ran out of fuel and they fell into the sea. So there is no mystery in the death of the torpedo bombers. In the case of Flight 19, this is an absolutely human factor, and the tragedy would not have happened if the commander had listened to his subordinates. But there is no answer to where the seaplane that went in search of them disappeared to. Well, that's when the legend of the Bermuda Triangle appeared, asked the journalist. A little later, in 1951, Edward Jones, a correspondent for the Associated Press, in an article about the missing Flight 19 and similar cases, called this place the Devil's Sea. But another name for the anomaly, proposed in 1964 by the writer Vincent Gaddis, took root. His work was called the Deadly Bermuda Triangle. From that moment on, there was a wave of articles and books that focused on the mysticism. This is especially evident in the book The Bermuda Triangle by Charles Berlitz. As a researcher of the paranormal, he has brought so much mystery to history that the popularity of this place has become worldwide. But really, something mysterious is happening there, right? Absolutely. There were cases when ships disappeared without a trace, without giving an SOS signal. There are also more mysterious situations, the appearance of ghost ships in the triangle. That is, the ship is fully operational, calmly drifting, dinner is served in the mess hall, not a line that's not written in the log, and the crew has disappeared without a trace. Various sources claim that the last mysterious disappearance was recorded in 1976. No, it continues nowadays. Not on such a terrifying scale, though. A few years ago, light aircraft disappeared, people disappeared from yachts. Cursed place, said the journalist. Well, compared to other parts of the world's oceans, it's not so cursed. From the point of view of statistics, there are worse sites. It's just that the Bermuda Triangle is more popular and not so covered by tracking systems. Do you know where most of the marine disasters occur? In the English Channel. And this is understandable. There is a huge number of ships, a kind of marine Moscow automobile ring road. But no one would think of calling this strait a cursed place. It's just it's in plain sight. If a ship is lost, people see it, even if the ship did not have the time to report the problem. There are attempts to explain the mysteries of otherworldly forces, the abduction of ships by aliens from outer space, or the inhabitants of underwater Atlantis, or moving through space-time portals. And the scientist's response, oh, well, it's beautiful but anti-scientific. As for the logical explanations, there are three of them. One of the most fashionable versions is the methane emissions. Imagine that at the bottom of the Bermuda Triangle there are such natural cavities with gas. For example, from the decomposition of algae or geological processes. Methane can ooze or it can be released under certain conditions, abruptly and quickly. In this case, a huge number of bubbles rush to the surface, forming such a sea soda that reduces the density of the water so much that the ship simply loses buoyancy and instantly sinks. Can this explain the lack of distress signals? Exactly. But the weak side of the version is that no one has ever observed it live, only in the laboratory. The other weak side, this hypothesis does not explain the missing airplanes. It explains, said the scientist, if only the airplane was going at a low altitude. A cloud of methane can change to lift, and an experienced pilot can destroy the craft. But for airliners at high altitude, methane, of course, is not terrible. So what is the second version or hypothesis? Periodically, very high, up to 30 meters, steep waves occur unpredictably in the ocean. In a collision with such a 10-story, almost vertical wall of water, the ship will either dive and be crushed, or it will rise to the top and break in half on a thin ridge. In both situations, the SOS does not have time to apply. Everything is happening too quickly. By the way, cases of shipbreaks are recorded and described. But again, the waves do not explain the loss of aircraft. Well, and then there is the third hypothesis. In the sea, there are sounds of any frequency, including around 10 hertz. This is infrasound, which affects the internal organs of a person, especially the brain. As a result, there are hallucinations, unexplained panic. The crew may abandon the ship, lowering the boats, or even jump overboard. This option just explains the appearance of ghost ships. Well, what causes the infrasonic waves? There are various reasons. For example, seismic activity, infrasonic atmospheric vibrations can also arise from the impact of surface sea waves on the atmosphere. These waves were recorded and studied. Can all these three phenomena converge in the Bermuda Triangle? A scientist says, yeah, and even more. After all, there are additional difficulties for sailors and pilots, such as magnetic disturbances, reefs, dangerous currents, sudden changes in the weather. Most likely, there is no single explanation for the tragedies in the Bermuda Triangle. In each case, some separate factor may be to blame. This is still to be studied and studied. The ocean is generally one big mystery. We know about it much less than about outer space. But the aliens are not to blame for the tragedies. I don't think so. If they had existed, they would not have demonstrated themselves in such terrible fashion. Why would they kill us? Why steal ships and planes? It's just illogical. And that's the end of his interview. I respect opinions of people like Zhmur, even though I disagree with him on some points. Let's look at some of the hypotheses that the Russian scientists listed with greater detail. We already know that the Russian Navy commanders do not exclude extraterrestrial sentient presence in the area. There are more ideas, of course. One of the modern hypotheses of why ships sink and disappear together with the crew is the hypothesis of the methane crystal hydrate. When methane pressed under high pressure dissolves into the water, forming a vacuum of such density, a kind of void is formed into which ships fall. According to Doctor of Geological and Mineralogical Sciences, Professor Alexander Gorodnitsky. Indeed, over millions of years, dead marine organisms decomposing emit methane. At the very bottom, this substance forms the so-called crystal hydrates. Heated by energy emissions from the bowels of the earth, the hydrate turns into pure gas, which rushes with terrible force to the surface of the ocean, and the water turns into boiling foam. At the same time, its density decreases significantly, and the ship falls into the abyss in a matter of seconds. Other researchers believe that this is all about the gravitational swelling of the water. This phenomenon has been observed by many. For example, the pilots of a Boeing 707 during a flight from Puerto Rico to New York on April 11, 1963. 20 minutes after the takeoff, they saw the surface of the ocean about 5 miles to the right rise in a huge circular dome. It, according to observers, reached a diameter of several hundred meters. As the airliner flew over this place, the mountain began to quickly disappear. The pilots later inquired of the Coast Guard seismic centers, but didn't get a response. Well, also, how can you not remember those old legends about the sea monster that live in the ocean? Well, such a monster actually is the hydrate bottom, which, when disturbed, simultaneously picks up huge plumes of foam, and the gas rises, pulls down virtually any boat. This was once wrote leader of the Paranormal Phenomena Research Association, Kosmopoisk, Vadim Chernobrov, a young Russian scientist and author who passed away in 2017. He was a dear colleague, and we exchanged a lot of information, and I often mention him in my writings. If we accept this assumption, then of course we can say that the mystery of the sudden gobbling up of ships by the deep is solved. But how then to explain the disappearance of the airplanes? Well, what kind of mysterious fog at an altitude of 2,000 meters blocked the sun from the US military pilots? Is it possible that the American torpedo bombers were affected by a source of some radiation unknown to science? But which one? Not long ago, North American oceanographers discovered a perfectly flat plain with an area of 800 square kilometers at the bottom of the Bermuda Triangle. The surface of the plain looked smooth and polished, as if it had been worked on like by a giant grinding machine. Some have suggested this is ancient Atlantis. I want to remind my audience about my research in Mexico's Yucatan in the early 1990s and 2008. I could do only so much, but I was following clues and rumors from Soviet submariners who had observed ancient paved roads of the shore leading into the sea. I am sure they had observed much more than that, but we just know very little. But there is something out there by Yucatan, out in the ocean. Many researchers are inclined to the version that Atlantis is in the area of the Bermuda Triangle. Is it possible that the inhabitants of this legendary civilization possess technologies unknown to modern men? For example, most powerful power plants. Some of the most boldest, I guess, experts suggested that these installations are still in operation and may well be the cause of the tragedies in the Bermuda Triangle. Well, and maybe that's why so much attention from the navies of USSR and other nations. That is, some underwater generator spits out streams of deadly radio waves and destroys those who get too close to the side of the flooded Atlantis. This hypothesis sounds so fantastic that few people agree to believe in it. Moreover, it is not confirmed either by the results of the experiments or by a thorough study of specialists. But what specialists? Civilians. Well, we can attribute what's going on to such interesting explanation, but we need to know that, as it turned out, Bermuda is located on the top of a huge mountain, the height of which is more than 4,000 meters. Presumably, it was formed as a result of volcanic eruptions that occurred at an early stage of the development of the Atlantic Ocean. The volcano erupted and gradually rose above the surface of the ocean until it became dead 30 million years ago. Wind and rain destroyed it to the top of the flat plateau. As sea levels rose after the Ice Age, Bermuda became a small piece of land atop an isolated sea mountain. Moreover, according to scientists, the territory of the Bermuda Triangle is a weather hive, where hurricanes and storms can create huge and bizarre waves. The reason for the crash of aircraft can also be hexagonal clouds with straight edges along the perimeter of the triangle. They create zones of turbulence and powerful airflows, the speed of which reaches 275 kilometers per hour. No existing aircraft can cope with such conditions. It is literally thrown into the water. Now let's look again at infrasound, and I do ask you to recall my videos about the Dyatlov Pass tragedy and some possible explanation as to the cause. Yeah, it's an ocean away, but strange things have occurred on our planet. Our ear perceives mechanical sound vibrations in the range from 20 Hz to 20 kilohertz. What is below is called infrasound. We do not hear it yet, and what is above is called ultrasound. We don't hear it anymore. But this does not mean that we do not perceive it. That's according to Natalia Lebedeva, a Russian doctor of biological sciences. This hypothesis also explains why disasters occur in clear weather. It is likely that the infrasound wave caused by a storm that raged hundreds of kilometers from the area can reach the crash site. Could it be that the sailors had fallen into a state of panic under the influence of infrasound? Moreover, the masts and the hull of the ship starting to oscillate in resonance with the infrasonic wave can crack and even break. It is obvious that at such moments sailors are able to leave the ship in an unspeakable panic and by any means just throwing themselves into the open sea and by not using the lifeboats. Remember this case. December 4, 1972, the brigantine Maria Celeste left New York for Genoa with a large shipment of spirits. A month later, the ship was discovered in the ocean by a crew of the schooner Dei Grazia. The sailors were surprised that the brigantine was going in a strange way and did not respond to the signalman's requests. When the sailors from the schooner landed on board, they did not find a single crew member. The cargo of alcohol in the holds was not touched, as well as the money in the captain's safe. Well, as for the Flying Dutchman, such facts are historically recorded. There were yachts, said Igor Barclay, a veteran of the Soviet Navy intelligence service. The theory of the impact of infrasound on living organisms, some experts use it to explain that such a phenomenon as the mass suicide of whales and dolphins, which are thrown ashore for no apparent reason. In 1946, a ship abandoned by the crew was discovered near the Bahamas. 2 years earlier, the ghost ship Rubicon was constantly seen drifting without a crew along the coast of Florida. Only the dog remained on board. What caused the crews to abandon their ships? An overwhelming sense of fear, because anyone who is in the ocean understood that in general there are sharks and all sorts of other dangers, but the feeling of fear was stronger when the person is on the ship, according to Natalia Lebedeva. The description looks very convincing. The infrasound generated by the elements provokes various mental disorders, causes animal fear, and even destroys sailors. But again, this hypothesis is without strong evidence. In addition, it also does not explain the disappearance of aircraft, and above all, the tragedy of the U.S. Avenger bomber flight. By the way, here we can once again recall the last words of Lieutenant Taylor on the radio. They are like us. Who are they? Or what is it? The biggest mystery in that story. Only 2 decades later, the first versions began to appear, which could bring us closer to the solution, if we ever find the answer. Experts believe that the ships and aircraft that disappeared in the triangle fell into another time dimensions. I'm not sure who the experts are, but some people believe it. And most likely they continued and possibly continue to exist there, people who have disappeared. Among the many unexpected disappearances of ships and planes and attempts to explain these anomalies, there is the hypothesis of aberration in time. That is a space-time shift, which gives some hope that the ship did not just die with the crew, but was transferred to another dimension, to another space, and somewhere perhaps both the captain and the crew and passengers survived. Of course, this is a rather fantastic assumption, but it should be considered as a hypothesis, explained Sergei Smirnov, a senior researcher of the Pulkovo Observatory. a very prestigious observatory in Russia. And of course, UFOs are blamed by some. For example, June 5, 1965, a C-119 military transport plane with 9 crew members took off from the U.S. Naval Base Homestead. The plane did not return to the airfield. No explosions in the air or when falling into the water were recorded. At the same time, American astronaut James McDivitt, who was making an orbital flight on the Gemini 4 spacecraft, observed and photographed an unidentified flying object that was hanging over the Caribbean islands at the time when C-119 disappeared. Neither the pilots nor the wreckage of the aircraft was found then, as well as the traces of those bombers, of course, that disappeared in 1945, as well as the traces of ships and sailors who were listed as missing in the Bermuda Triangle. And then people try to explain it by a new version of events, that it was the aggression of space aliens. Well, I will continue to collect more information about the Bermuda Triangle and the research by Russians. And cases like this one I'll bring to you too. Listen to this. This was related by Gennady Bocharov, correspondent at the time. On February 2nd, 1977, he was flying from Bogota, Colombia to New York to meet the widow of the American literary classic Ernest Hemingway. He had to meet Mary Hemingway. The flight route lay over the waters of the Caribbean Sea and the South Atlantic, in the so-called Bermuda Triangle. Among the 120 passengers on board the Boeing were 3 Muscovites: Vladimir Sitsev, the managing director of the Central Committee of the Komsomol; Anatoly Konunikov, an employee of the Committee of Youth Organizations of the USSR; and Bocharov, a special correspondent of Komsomolskaya Pravda newspaper. After refueling in Barranquilla, the Avianca Boeing headed for New York, 4 hours over open water. Okay? At the 20th minute of the flight, the right plane of the aircraft suddenly slid up. In the next second, the Boeing managed to level off, but something happened. The course was changed. They were returning to Barranquilla. Draining the fuel, they landed. The repair took about an hour. They flew out normally without deviations, but at the same 20 minutes over the Caribbean Sea, the Boeing again lifted its right wing, and the next minute the crew was already turning it on its return course. The Bermuda Triangle did not let them through. Okay, so they landed. The repair now lasted 4 hours. It was dark. This time they were entering the searchlight-lit aircraft like a familiar king-size coffin. The takeoff was normal. Bocharov looked at his watch. Exactly at 20 minutes of the 8th, the right engine lit up with an orange flame, and it became clear the engine was on fire. The crew of the airplane tried to shoot down the flames with evolutions. Passengers were pressed into their seats, and the fatal howls began. People started screaming. Boeing, with a rushing roar, we went to the mainland, to the Barranquilla, which he said was lit like by Christmas lights. They did not land, they crashed. Bleach sprayed through the windows as fire trucks lined the entire strip. 3 rescues in half a day was too much for the Russians. The joy is only enough for 2 rescues. After 10 hours on a Boeing sent from Bogota, they were already flying over the night Atlantic without incident. Only at night and only over the ocean can you understand how limitless the world is and how desperate a person is in his movements. Nobody still knows what happened, why they couldn't go. The second such case in the history of world civil aviation has not yet been recorded, according to the Russian journalist. And why they couldn't fly to the Bermuda Triangle, nobody knows. I will continue, like I said, my research. I'm sure there is much more that we will find out someday about the Bermuda Triangle. And I ask that you please support my research if you can. You can find the ways to do it in the description. Please tell others about my channel. Please subscribe. Thank you and be safe.